My name is Lorraine Mae Hollister, and I am 78 years old. For most of my life, I told people I just had a rough childhood. That was my shorthand. It kept the conversation polite, tidy, something that could be tucked away between a sip of coffee and a change of subject. But this morning, sitting at my kitchen table in my small house on the edge of Milford, I said something out loud that I've never said before. Something that changed everything. I was abused. The words felt strange in my mouth, almost foreign. But the moment they left my lips, I felt my chest loosen. My hands stopped shaking. It was my granddaughter, Lily, who had asked the question that unlocked it. She was visiting for the weekend, scrolling on her phone, when she read a post about grooming. She frowned, looked up at me and asked, "Grandma, what does that mean exactly?" I started to answer like a teacher, calm, clinical, but the more I spoke, the more my voice broke. I realized I wasn't explaining it like an outsider. I was explaining it like someone who had lived it. By the time I finished, Lily's eyes were wide. "Grandma," she whispered, "that sounds like what happened to you." Froze. The room went quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator. 'Cause she was right. I had been groomed. Groomed to serve. Groomed to smile. Groomed to keep secrets that didn't belong to me. Groomed so well that even at 78 years old, I still felt the pull to protect the people who hurt me. I pushed my coffee cup aside and went to my bedroom closet. At the back, under a faded quilt, sat a box I hadn't opened in decades. Inside were old photographs, letters, and a journal I had written between the ages of 10 and 17. The cover was cracked, the ink faded, but the words were still there. Every detail, every shadow, every time I told myself to just be good so no one would get mad. I carried it back to the table, set it between us, and looked at Lily. "Do you want to know what really happened?" "Yes." She nodded, her eyes locked on mine. "Then I'm going to tell you," I said. "All of it. Because I've kept these pages hidden long enough. And the people who told me to smile and stay quiet, they're the ones who should be afraid now." I opened to the first page and began to read. And with that, my story, the real story, finally began. If you're ready to hear the truth that's been buried for over 60 years, stay with me. Like this video, share your thoughts in the comments and don't forget to subscribe. Because once this story starts, you won't want to miss a word. The first memory in my journal is dated June 12, 1955. I was 10 years old, sitting on the porch steps of our farmhouse, wearing a cotton dress that smelled faintly of bleach. My father had just finished reminding me how to greet guests. "Stand up straight. Don't slouch. Smile like you mean it. And if I hear one word about what goes on in this house, you'll regret it." That was the refrain of my childhood. A set of instructions disguised as love. My mother never contradicted him. She was always in the background, silent, moving like a shadow between the kitchen and the laundry room. I used to wonder if she heard the same words I did. I know now she heard them all. She just decided surviving was quieter than fighting. I was groomed early to believe my role was service. My chores weren't just chores, they were rehearsals. Set the table, but make sure the forks were polished until I could see my face. Cook the cornbread, but don't taste it before it reached the table. Keep my voice soft, my eyes lowered, my smile constant. The strange thing about grooming is that it doesn't always start with outright cruelty. Sometimes it starts with praise. "You're such a good little helper," my father would say. His voice honeyed in front of neighbors. "Better than your brothers. You know how to make people feel welcome." Sounded like love. Felt like belonging. And when you grow up hungry for approval, you'll do anything to keep that warmth, even if you have to burn yourself to provide it. But that praise had a cost. When I got tired, when I didn't want to fetch another glass of iced tea, the sweetness would vanish. You think you're too good to listen. You think you can get lazy now. His hand would grip my wrist, not enough to bruise at first, but enough to remind me that my comfort didn't matter. I learned early that a smile could keep the peace. So I wore it like armor, even when my jaw ached from holding it too long. The journal entries from those years are littered with apologies. I'm sorry I forgot the biscuits. I'm sorry I spilled the lemonade. I'm sorry I looked tired. They weren't just notes about the day. They were confessions, as if existing in any state other than perfect service was a sin. By 13, the grooming had deepened into something worse. My father's words shifted from commands about chores to commands about my body. Don't wear that dress, it makes you look too grown. Walk with smaller steps. Keep your voice soft. Nobody likes a loud girl. It wasn't just about control. It was about shaping me into something that could never fight back. And it worked for decades. Even now, sitting at this table with Lily, I can still feel that muscle memory in my bones. That urge to soften my voice, to package the truth in something palatable. But the truth is raw. And if I'm going to tell it, I have to tell it without varnish. I look at the next page of my journal. September 4th, 1958. I was 13, and that was the day my father said something that would change how I saw myself forever. That was the day I realized the good girl they had been raising wasn't me at all. It was a mask. And one night, that mask nearly cracked in a way that could have destroyed me. I was 13, and the air that September was thick with the kind of heat that doesn't break, not even at night. The crickets were loud, the moon heavy in the sky, and our old farmhouse creaked like it was tired of holding all its secrets. It was a Thursday, which meant the same thing it always meant in our house. My father would spend the evening in the parlor with his whiskey glass and his radio, my brothers would be at ball practice, and my mother would be in the kitchen, busying herself with canning or baking, anything that kept her from sitting still too long. That day had been long even by my standards. School had started back the week before, and I'd been given the job of helping Miss Perkins, the home economics teacher, clean and prep the sewing machines after class. I didn't mind it. Miss Perkins was kind in a way that felt genuine. She asked about my drawings, my favorite colors, my plans after high school. Plans. As if I'd been allowed to have any. By the time I walked the mile home, my legs ached and my blouse stuck to my back. I wanted nothing more than to wash up and be left alone in my room. But when I came through the kitchen door, my father was standing there, leaning against the counter, looking at me like I'd interrupted something. "You're late," he said. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried weight. The kind that made your chest tighten. I stayed after to help. He cut me off. "Don't care why. Supper's not ready, is it?" I looked at the pot on the stove. My mother was already stirring it, her eyes downcast. I was just. "Go change your clothes," he said. "That dress looks sloppy." It was my only school dress that wasn't patched at the hem, and I'd pressed it that morning. But I didn't argue. I never argued. I went to my room, changed into a plain skirt and blouse, and came back to the kitchen just in time to hear him telling my mother I needed more discipline now that I was getting older. I knew better than to ask what that meant. We ate in silence. The only sounds were the clink of silverware and the slow ticking of the clock on the wall. I could feel his eyes on me even when I kept my head down. When I finished, I started to clear my plate, but he stopped me with a glance. "Come to the parlor after you're done with the dishes," he said. That was unusual. The parlor was his space. His radio, his chair, his rules. I'd only ever been invited in when company came, to serve coffee or pass around pie. My stomach tightened, but I nodded. When I walked in later, he was sitting in his armchair, the lamp casting shadows on the walls. A single glass of whiskey sat on the table beside him. He gestured for me to sit on the small settee across from him. "You're getting older," he began. "And older girls have to learn things. How to carry themselves. How to behave. People watch you now. They notice." I stared at my hands, the faint tremor in my fingers. "I've seen you at church laughing with those boys," he continued. "That's not how a respectable girl acts. You think they'll respect you if you give them attention." "No, sir," I said quietly. His eyes narrowed. "Look at me when I'm talking to you." I lifted my gaze, and there it was. That same look I'd seen in flashes before, the one that made my skin feel too tight. A mix of scrutiny and something darker, something I didn't have a name for then. "You need to understand," he said slowly, "that a girl's reputation is everything. One wrong step and it's ruined. People will talk. They'll say things about you. Things you can't take back." The air in the room felt heavier. I wanted to get up to leave, but my body stayed still, trained by years of knowing that stillness kept the peace. Then he said it, the sentence that would etch itself into my memory like a burn. "That's why I have to make sure you know how to behave. How to keep quiet when you should." It was an odd thing to say. Odd and yet perfectly in line with all the lessons I'd been learning without realizing it. Service. Silence. Mail. That night, the lesson went further than words. I won't put every detail here. Not because I'm afraid to, but because some truths are sharper when you don't blunt them with overexposure. What matters is this. It was the first time I felt the full force of his control, the way he could twist care into correction, love into leverage. When it was over, he told me to straighten up before my brothers got home. My mother never asked why I came back to the kitchen pale and quiet. She didn't need to. She'd been through her own training. That night, after everyone went to bed, I pulled out my journal and wrote until my hand cramped. I didn't call it abuse. I didn't even call it wrong. I just described it in plain detail like it was another chore. Something to be done and forgotten. But I couldn't forget. For weeks after, I jumped whenever someone came up behind me. I avoided the parlor unless it was full of people. I learned to anticipate his moods by the way his boots sounded on the porch. Heavy, slow steps meant I could breathe. Quick, sharp ones meant I needed to disappear. That September night wasn't the last time. It was just the one that made me realize I was no longer a child in his eyes. I was something else entirely, something to be shaped, molded, kept in place. The grooming became sharper after that. He criticized my friends, my posture, the way I spoke. "Don't laugh so loud. Don't eat so much. Don't get ideas about leaving this house before you're married." And I obeyed. For years. The mask became second nature. I could smile at the pastor on Sunday, chat with the ladies at the general store, and hide every fracture inside me. Nobody suspected. Nobody asked. And if they did, I would have lied. Because by then, I'd learned the most important lesson of all. No one was coming to save me. It would be 65 years before I would even say the word abuse out loud. But that night, the night of September 4th, 1958, was the night my silence took root. And now, here I am at 78, about to rip it out by the roots in front of the very people who told me it never happened. I married at 19. Not because I was in love, but because the man who asked didn't make my stomach knot when he walked into a room. That felt like a good enough reason at the time. His name was Harold Keating. He worked at the grain mill, had steady hands and a steady paycheck, and the kind of politeness that came from being raised in a house where dinner was always on the table at 6. I didn't tell him much about my life before we met. I'd learned by then that the less you say, the less you can be judged for. We moved into a small house 2 towns over, where no one knew my father's face. For a while I thought distance might mean freedom. Didn't. The habits my father had trained into me followed me like a second skin. I cooked what Harold liked, ironed his shirts the way he preferred, and never asked for more than I was given. When Harold forgot our first anniversary, I told myself it was fine. He worked long hours and I didn't need flowers or cards. When he spoke over me in front of friends, I smiled and let him. When he spent our savings on a new hunting rifle without telling me, I told myself I was lucky he wasn't cruel. It was a low bar, but it was mine. By the time I had our first child, a daughter named Marianne, my silence had become so ingrained that I barely noticed it anymore. I just made space for everyone else. I was good at it. Too good. Raising Marianne was like holding sunlight. She was curious, bold, the kind of girl who would ask why 10 times in a row without blinking. I loved that about her, and I feared for it. I tried to teach her manners, yes, but also to keep her fire. It was harder than I expected. When she was 10, she told me a teacher had grabbed her wrist too hard during recess. My stomach went cold, but my voice stayed calm. Maybe he didn't mean to, I said. Even as the words left my mouth, I hated myself for them. I was teaching her my own bad habits. By the time I had my second child, a boy named Philip, the years were already wearing me thin. Harold was steady, but his version of love was provision, not tenderness. We lived side by side, raising kids and paying bills, but we never touched the deep places in each other's lives. I didn't tell him about September 4th, 1958. I didn't tell him about the nights I still woke with my heart pounding, my hands cold and clammy. When my parents died, my father first, then my mother a few years later, I didn't cry. People thought I was cold. They didn't know I'd been grieving the loss of safe parents since I was 7 years old. Years passed. The kids grew up, moved out. Marianne married a man who reminded me of Harold, steady but absent in the ways that mattered. Philip left for California and sent postcards more than he called. I filled my days with church work, quilting circles, and baking for community events. It was easy to hide in plain sight when no one looked too closely. But the quiet moments were dangerous. That's when the old memories would slip in, like smoke under a door. I'd be washing dishes and suddenly feel the weight of my father's stare. Folding laundry and hear his voice telling me to keep quiet when you should. I hated that he still lived in me. One afternoon when I was in my early 60s, I was helping clean out the attic and found the old diary I'd kept hidden as a girl. The one with the September 4th entry. The one that held every breadcrumb I'd left myself in case I ever needed proof. I sat on the attic floor, the dust motes swirling in the sunlight, and read every page. By the time I finished, I was shaking. Not from fear this time, but from the realization that I had been carrying a map of my own survival for decades. Still, I didn't show it to anyone. I told myself it was too late, that dredging it up would only cause pain. But another part of me, the part that had started to grow sharper with age, knew I was keeping it for a reason. Then came last year's Thanksgiving. Marianne and Philip were both there, along with their families. My granddaughter, Lila, brought her fiancé. There was laughter, the smell of roasting turkey, the sound of football from the living room. And then someone, I don't even remember who, made a joke about how Lorraine never talks about her childhood. I laughed along, but inside something shifted. Because sitting there, surrounded by people who thought they knew me, I realized they only knew the version I'd been trained to give them. The quiet, smiling, agreeable version. Not the truth. And suddenly, I didn't want to take that version to my grave. Over the next few months, I started sorting through my things. I found the diary again, this time placing it on the nightstand instead of hiding it. I read the entries every morning, letting myself remember without flinching. Then Marianne invited me to a family gathering for her 60th birthday. Everyone would be there, even the cousins who rarely visited. It would be the first time in years that the whole family was under one roof. That's when I knew. It was time. I didn't tell anyone what I planned. I didn't rehearse or write a speech. I would simply bring the diary, open it to September 4th, 1958, and read. I thought about how they might react. Some would be shocked. Some would deny it. Some might even leave the room. But none of them would be able to say they didn't know anymore. On the morning of the gathering, I dressed in a soft blue dress and my mother's locket. My hands trembled as I slipped the diary into my purse. By the time I arrived, the house was buzzing with voices and the smell of barbecue. I kissed cheeks, hugged grandchildren, accepted a plate of food I didn't eat. And when everyone had settled in the living room, Marianne called for attention to thank everyone for coming. That was my moment. I stood up slowly, the diary in my hands. "I have something I'd like to read to you all," I said. The room quieted, though a few people still smiled politely, expecting some sweet memory or old family joke. I opened the diary, my eyes on the faded ink. "This," I began, "is from September 4th, 1958. And as the words formed on my tongue, I felt the years of silence start to crack wide open. I held the diary open with both hands, the way a preacher might hold a Bible. My voice was steady, steadier than I thought it would be. "This," I said again, looking around the room, "is from September 4th, 1958. I was 17 years old." Few people shifted in their seats. My grandson Eli cleared his throat, his polite smile faltering. Marianne, my daughter, sat cross-legged on the couch, her brow knit in confusion. Philip leaned against the doorway, arms crossed, the way he always did when he thought I was about to talk too long. I lowered my gaze to the page. It happened again today. After supper, when Mama took Asa to bed, Daddy told me to help him stack wood in the shed. He closed the door behind us. I told him I didn't want to, but he gripped my arm so tight it left a mark. He said I was his, that I'd better not tell or he'd make sure I regretted it. I kept my face blank like I always do. When it was over, I went to the creek and washed my hands until the skin burned. I don't think Mama sees me anymore. I don't think anyone does. My voice didn't crack, but the silence in the room thickened, heavy and electric. I looked up. Eli's mouth had dropped open slightly. My great-niece Nora's eyes brimmed with tears. Philip's arms had fallen to his sides, his knuckles pale. Marianne's voice broke the silence. What is this?" she whispered. "It's my diary," I said. "I started keeping it when I was a child. I wrote down everything your grandfather, my father, did to me." Someone gasped. It might have been my cousin Ray's wife. "Mom!" Marianne's voice trembled. Why are you telling us this now?" "Because," I said, "I'm 83 years old and I have spent a lifetime protecting the wrong people." The air in the room shifted. It was like they were all seeing me for the first time. Not the smiling matriarch with lemon bars and holiday centerpieces, but a girl who had been taught to keep her mouth shut and had never been allowed to stop. I could see the disbelief flicker across Philip's face. "You're saying—" "I'm not saying anything," I cut in. "I'm telling you exactly what happened. And I have years of these entries. Every date, every detail, every bruise." Nora stood up. "I believe you," she said quietly. Her voice cracked, but it carried. Her mother reached for her arm, but Nora didn't sit back down. Eli's jaw was tight, his eyes glassy. He looked like a man fighting to process something too big for the room. Marianne, she just sat there, frozen. Why didn't you ever tell you? He asked. Because the last time I told anyone, I was called a liar. I was told I was trying to ruin a good man's life. And I believed, for far too long, that keeping quiet was the only way to survive. I closed the diary slowly, the sound of the pages brushing together louder than any applause or gasp could have been. You're free to think what you want, I said finally. But this is the truth. It has been my truth for 66 years. And I will not die without saying it out loud, with all of you here to hear it. Silence. No one knew where to put their eyes. Finally Ray muttered, "Hell." His voice was low, but it broke the dam. Questions started coming, hushed, stumbling, half-formed. When did it start? Did Grandma know? Why him? Why would he? I didn't answer them all. Some didn't deserve answers. Some I didn't have. But when Nora stepped forward and put her arms around me, I let her. For the first time in decades, I let someone hold me while knowing the whole truth. I wasn't shaking. I wasn't breaking. I was lighter. Because now it wasn't just mine to carry. And when I left that gathering, the diary was still in my purse, but it felt different. Less like evidence and more like a weapon I had finally drawn after a lifetime of keeping it sheathed. Whatever they did with the truth from here, that was on them. I had done my part, and I had done it on my own terms.